What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Fight gloves are on. UFC picks. UFC 149 going down this weekend from beautiful Calgary, Alberta. UFC Calgary finally making its debut. Everybody seems to be starting their prediction videos this way. This is the card that has literally been throat fucked by injuries. But, we can't live in the past. We can't think about what this card could have been. We got to think about what the card is. And actually, it's still a fairly solid fight card. We have an Interim Bantamweight Championship fight. We have the long-awaited UFC debut of Hector Lombard. And we have two of the longest undefeated streaks in MMA, both being put on the line for the same night. So, you know what? It's not as bad a card as people seem to be calling it. Yes, it could have been better, but we got a solid fight card here, and let's talk about it. We got a couple of prelim fights that are going to be airing live and free on Facebook, and we're going to start there. In the lightweight division, we have Mitch Clark taking on Anton, I believe it's pronounced Koivunen. Or Koivunen, or something like that. I'm sure if he played in the NHL, I'd probably pronounce it perfectly. Mitch Clark, 9-1 on his pro career, lost his UFC debut by TKO to John Cholish. Mitch Clark, basically straight-up grappler. He's got 6 submission wins. He's Canadian, and he's very used to fighting in Alberta. I think only 2 of his career fights have been outside the province of Alberta. So he's certainly going to have the home field advantage, and he's very used to fighting in front of Calgary crowds for whatever that happens to be worth. Anton Koivunen, 16-5 in his pro career, also lost his UFC debut. That was a unanimous decision loss to Salas, I believe, in his UFC debut. He's another really solid grappler who has a number of submissions to his name. He's currently the number 2 ranked lightweight out of Europe. Koivunen is a very talented fighter. He didn't really show a ton of great stuff in his fight with Salas. I actually thought he was relatively underwhelming in that fight. Excuse me, just going to adjust the camera there. I'm still going to give this fight to Anton Koivunen. He's got the experience edge. He's been fighting, relatively speaking, higher level competition outside of the UFC. So I'm going to give the edge there to Koivunen. I'm going to give it to him by unanimous decision. I think these guys grappling will basically nullify each other. I think their grappling is pretty close to the same. So we'll give Koivunen the unanimous decision. The other prelim card on Facebook is in the featherweight division. Another Canadian, Antonio Carvalho, taking on Daniel Pineda. And this is actually a fight that I went a little bit back and forth on. Antonio Carvalho, 13-5 in his pro career, 0-1 also in the UFC. Unanimous decision loss to Felipe Arantes in his UFC debut. Carvalho is a black belt in Shotokan Karate. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He has a green belt in Judo. He's a very well-rounded and talented fighter. Guy that can grapple, guy that can strike. Very, very well-rounded, very talented guy. Daniel Pineda, 17-8 in his pro career. He is 2-1 in the UFC, so definitely has more UFC experience. He's submitted by Mike Brown in his last fight after, I believe, back-to-back submission wins to start his career. He has been submitted in 6 of his 8 professional losses, but all 17 of his wins have been finishes. Again, I went a little back and forth on this. I started with Carvalho, and then there were some very legitimate points made about Daniel Pineda that I was like, yeah, maybe Daniel Pineda is, he's got a chance at this fight. Ultimately, I had to stick with my original gut and stick with Antonio Carvalho. I think he's going to take this by way of unanimous judge's decision. He could submit Pineda, so my second choice, of course, would be Carvalho by way of submission, but I don't know. Carvalho, again, didn't look overly impressive, I guess, in his UFC debut, so I'm a little concerned, which is why I think I'm going to play it safe and call it a unanimous decision. Victory for Carvalho. Moving on to the rest of the prelim card, which is going to be played on FX, which means 6 people will see it. Starting in the bantamweight division, we have Bryan Caraway taking on Mitch Gagnon. Bryan Caraway, 16-5 in his pro career, won his UFC debut by submitting Nice in his debut. This guy is all grappling. 14 submission wins. Trains with Team Alpha Male. Of course, Urijah Faber, Team Alpha Male, who we're going to talk about later on this card. So he's Caraway, very straight up grappler. The Caraway has had some mental issues with like preparing for fights and well within fights. So he's got an impressive record of 16-5, but I've seen some things with Caraway that make me a little concerned. On the other side, of course, Mitch Gagnon, 8-1, making his UFC debut. He's got 8 submission wins. So all 8 of his wins have come by way of submission. The one loss that he had really concerned me because he was like a fish out of water on his back. He was being held down by, it was a larger guy, but he's a striker. He's a guy that's not known as a good wrestler. I can't even remember the guy's name. But what I did remember was, like, he's a stand-up fighter. He's a striker, not known as a good wrestler, and he basically held Gagnon down at will, and that was again in his one loss. But I can't take away the fact that Gagnon is a very talented grappler. Of course, you don't get all 8 of your professional wins by submission without being a good grappler. It's another one that I went back and forth on. Originally, I started with Caraway, but then I was like, oh, Lord. So I had to switch it, and I'm going to go with Mitch Gagnon to actually get the submission victory in this fight in the second round. Moving up to the light heavyweights, we have Ryan Jimmo making his UFC debut, taking on another talented fighter, Anthony Perosh. Ryan Jimmo, 16-1 on his pro career, making his UFC debut, currently riding a 15-fight win streak. Former Maximum Fighting Championships 205-pound champion. Due to grinder, half of his wins, 8 of his 16 wins have come by way of decision. He's a grinder, he's a good grappler, he's a good striker, he's a well-rounded fighter. I get where the knocks against him come from in terms of his personality. I just think the guy's a talented fighter, so I like Ryan Jimmo. Anthony Perosh, no slouch in his own right, 13-6 on his pro career, 3-3 in the UFC, but currently riding a 3-fight win streak against Blackledge, Cyril Diabate, and Penner was his other one. A third-degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So you have a fight where, like, I think Ryan Jimmo's going to be able to take Perosh down, but once Perosh is down, we see that sort of third-degree black belt style coming out there where Perosh is able to fight off of his back. So Jimmo is going to have to be very, very careful against Perosh's submissions. I think ultimately Ryan Jimmo is going to take this in a unanimous decision. Could be a relatively boring fight. I think Perosh is going to have him in trouble a couple of times with submission attempts off his back, but I think ultimately the judges are going to look at it like, well, you know, Jimmo was on top, so he was in control, so ergo Jimmo's going to get the unanimous decision. That's the way I'm going to pick it. Moving back down to the bantamweights, we have Roland Delorme taking on Francisco Rivera. Roland Delorme, 8-1 on his pro career, and undefeated 2-0 in the UFC. 6 of his 8 wins have come by way of submission, but he has finished all 8, so his other 2 have come either by knockout or TKO. Delorme's got a nasty rear naked choke, man. Just watching like some of his victories, like he's got a really good rear naked choke. The one aspect of Delorme's fight game that I really worry about is his takedown defense. His takedown defense is a problem. Luckily, again, he is a very good grappler, so even if he gets taken down, he can kind of get out of trouble. However, his takedown defense is an issue. Francisco Rivera, 8-2 on his pro career. He is 1-1 in the UFC. He decisioned Soto in his UFC debut. 5 of his 8 pro wins have come by way of knockout. Of course, he has a notable technical knockout loss to Eric Koch in the WEC. To me, this fight is going to end up with I figure it's going to end up on the ground again. I've got Roland Delorme taking this, grabbing a choke in there somewhere, whether it's a guillotine or, again, that rear naked, which for Delorme is very, very nasty. I'm going to take Delorme by way of second round submission. Final fight on the prelim card. In the middleweight division, we have Court the Crusher McGee taking on Nick the Promise Ring. Court McGee, 13-2 in his pro career, 3-1 in the UFC. Had a unanimous decision loss to Costa Philippou in his last fight. 7 of his 13 pro wins have come by way of submission. The book out there on McGee. Of course, he's southpaw, very crisp boxing. Boxing is his base. Good striker, especially with his hands. But McGee has a very solid takedown defense game, also has a solid takedown game, and he's also a solid grappler. McGee is really developing into this very, very, very well-rounded fighter who is dangerous wherever the fight goes. Taking on Nick Ring, 12-1 on his pro career. 2-1 in the UFC, had a unanimous decision loss to Tim Boetsch in his last fight, who also fights on this card. Half of his pro wins have come by way of submission, 6 out of 12. He's another guy, Ring's another guy with solid chokes, guillotines, rear nakeds, everything like that. Solid chokes and excellent kickboxing. So it's a tale of two guys who are very, very, very well-rounded. This is another fight that I kind of went back and forth on. I eventually settled on Court McGee. I don't think Ring will be able to take him down, nor do I think McGee is going to really shoot for all that many takedowns on Ring. I think McGee would be comfortable keeping this fight standing. I don't think either guy's going to finish it. I'm going to take McGee by way of unanimous judges' decision. That moves us on to the main card. First fight on the main card is a fight that does not deserve to be on the main card. There are at least 2 fights on the undercard, if not 3, that I would rather see on the main card than this fight, but that's okay. Welterweight fight, Chris Clements taking on Matt Riddle. Chris Clements, 11-4 in his pro career, 1-0 in the UFC, winning his debut against Keith Wisniewski by way of split decision. Chris Clements has knocked out 10 of his 11 professional wins, and he's also been submitted in 3 of his 4 professional losses. So, book on this guy, stand-up fighter, keep the fight standing. If it goes to the ground, could be in trouble. Matt Riddle, 6-3 in his pro career, having fought his entire pro career within the UFC. He decisioned, I believe it was Henry Martinez in his last fight. Matt Riddle's a guy. I don't like Matt Riddle. He's a guy that's he puts on a good mean face, but like his stand-up striking is really sloppy, and like people say that he comes to fight, and I suppose I can get behind that. I'm not a Matt Riddle fan. I don't know. I just can't. It's like guys like Matt Riddle, Ed Herman. I don't know. There's just some guys I just can't get behind them, and Matt Riddle, for whatever reason, is one of those guys. It's going to be dangerous if this fight goes to the ground. If the fight goes to the ground, I think Matt Riddle can finish it. I'm going to go with Chris Clements for either a knockout or a technical knockout inside the first round. If that doesn't happen and Riddle gets the fight to the mat, I can easily see Riddle winning this fight, but I'm going to go with Chris Clements, sticking with my gut. Welterweight, we have Bryan Eversole taking on James Head. If Bryan Eversole's name sounds familiar, you're not going crazy. Eversole just fought last month and is taking this fight on short notice. Eversole 14-1-1 on his pro career, 66 professional fights. He's an undefeated 4-0 in the UFC, currently riding an 11-fight win streak. Again, as I said, second fight in a month. He fought at UFC on FX4, was victorious. Eversole known just as much for his fighting as he is the hero. Taking on James Head. James Head 8-2 on his pro career, 1-1 in the UFC. He subbed a Beatty in his last fight, which was also his welterweight debut, so obviously a successful debut at this weight class. 7 of his 8 wins have come by way of finishes, and James Head, a very well-rounded fighter. I can't bring myself to bet against Bryan Eversole. He's one of those guys that he's entertaining just as a person, but he's also so entertaining as a fighter. So I'm going to take Eversole in this. I think he can finish this fight. I take Bryan Eversole by way of third round TKO to defeat James Head. Moving all the way up to the big boys, heavyweight contest between Cheick Kongo and Shawn Jordan. Cheick Kongo 17-7-2 in his pro career, 10-5-1 in the UFC, so a wealth of UFC experience. Was TKO'd by Mark Hunt in his last fight. That was in Saitama, Japan. But he was unbeaten in his last 4 prior to that loss, and was looking like a guy that, get another couple of wins under your belt, you might be looking at a potential title shot, or a chance at a title shot. Kongo needs to keep fights standing. He really, really does. And that's not to say that he's got a granite chin, because he doesn't. But he needs to keep fights standing and needs to take fights seriously. It was mentioned, Scotty mentioned it, Kamikaze Overdrive. Kongo looked disinterested in his fight with Mark Hunt, like whether he didn't take the fight seriously or going over to Japan was a big issue for him or whatever. Just looked disinterested in that fight, and Mark Hunt made him pay for it. So, I mean, he needs to come into this fight rededicated, focused, like, I'm going to go out and kill this guy on the feet, keep it standing. That's what Cheick Kongo needs to do. Shawn Jordan, 13-3 on his pro career, won his UFC debut against Ollie Thompson, and that was his last fight. TKOing Ollie Thompson, of course, and he also had a wicked backflip in that fight. 9 of his 13 pro wins have come by way of knockout, which is a little surprising now knowing that he trains with Jackson Submission Fighting. So he is primarily a stand-up fighter, but he's developing, an all-around game. Say what you will about Greg Jackson's camp, he's getting good training. Jordan is younger. Jordan is faster. Yes, Kongo is bigger, but has Father Time caught up with him? Has Jordan's speed advantage sort of passed him by? I went back and forth on it. I started with Kongo. The more I thought about it, gotta go Shawn Jordan. Shawn Jordan by unanimous judges' decision. I don't think they'll finish this fight. I think it'll go to the judges. Shawn Jordan take 2 rounds out of 3, and I think Kongo will probably take the first round. He'll probably come out hot and fade towards the end. Shawn Jordan, unanimous judges' decision, victory over Cheick Kongo. What could end up being one of Cheick Kongo's last fights. We come to the co-main event of the evening. Hector Lombard, finally, Hector Lombard makes his UFC debut, taking on Tim Boetsch. Hector Lombard, 31-2-1-1 on his pro career, making his UFC debut, as I mentioned, on a 20-fight win streak. His only 2 career losses come against Akihiro Gono and Gegard Mousasi, and you have to remember, this is Pride era Akihiro Gono and Pride era Gegard Mousasi. These are his only 2 professional career losses, which is a great track record. Tim Boetsch, 15-4 on his pro career. He is 6-3 in the UFC, but he is unbeaten at the middleweight division. TKO'd Yushin Okami in a very exciting fight last time out. 12 of his 15 pro wins have come by way of a finish. He's a Jeet Kune Do fighter. He is a judoist. I mentioned that he's a judoist because, of course, you have Hector Lombard, who is, I believe, a 4th degree black belt in judo, I think, if I'm saying that right. Here's the deal about Hector Lombard. Everybody talks about Hector Lombard like, well, Hector Lombard was no big deal. He was recycling cans in Bellator, and, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Hector Lombard's got some legitimate wins. To his credit. Okay, Trevor Prangley's not a UFC fighter. Maybe he's not a UFC caliber fighter. Doesn't mean Trevor Prangley's not a good fighter. And Lombard went out and he beat him. Look at a guy like Joe Dirksen, a guy that's fought in the UFC before. Joe Dirksen is a UFC caliber fighter. Lombard's gone out and beaten him. Lombard has beaten Bryan Eversole in the past. Granted, that was back in, I think, 2007, but he's still beaten him. Lombard has legitimate wins. It's not like he's one of these guys fighting Igor the Butcher from across the block and putting it on a professional MMA record. He's fighting and beating legitimate fighters. So, I don't understand the hate for Lombard. I've said in the past that I consider Hector Lombard to be the only middleweight on the planet that could beat Anderson Silva. I've said that in the past. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I was just a homer for Hector Lombard when I said that. But I have said that in the past. And Tim Boetsch ain't no bitch. Boetsch is a damn good fighter. People have talked about, Lombard left Bellator so that he didn't have to fight Alexander Shlemenko for the Bellator title. He's beaten Shlemenko in the past. So all these people calling like, oh, Lombard ducked his rematch with Slamenko. Yeah, he ducked his rematch with Slamenko to come to UFC and fight fucking Tim Boetsch. Like, that's out of the frying pan into the fire. So, you know, eat a dick with that stuff. Tim Boetsch, very legitimate fighter, has looked phenomenal since he moved down to middleweight. Lombard, this is a big-time test for Hector Lombard. I think it's a test he's going to pass. I think Lombard will actually have the strength advantage in this, despite the fact that Boetsch came down from light heavyweight. I figure Lombard's going to control a lot of this fight. I'm picking Lombard to take a unanimous decision victory. His gas tank is going to be questionable. Yes, it is. No question about it. And he's making his UFC debut, so there could be some UFC jitters in there as well. Completely understand that. Hector Lombard, to me, is an all-world talent, and I think he's going to display it against Tim Boetsch. That leads us to our main event fight of the evening for the Interim Bantamweight Championship. We have Urijah Faber, the California kid, taking on Renan Barao. Faber, 26-5 in his pro career, 2-1 in the UFC, submitted Bryan in his last fight. 4 of Faber's last 5 wins have come by way of submission. Interesting percentile statistic for you. Urijah Faber avoids 65% of incoming strikes, which is not a bad number at all. Renan Barao, 28-1-1 on his pro career. 3-0, perfect record in the UFC, unbeaten in his last 29 fights. Again, right up there with Hector Lombard's win streak, and even now that I'm looking at it, Ryan Jimmo's win streak. Jimmo's on a 15-fight win streak as well. But Renan Barao, unbeaten in his last 29. He has finished 19 of his 28 professional wins. And another interesting percentile statistic for you, Renan Barao, training out of that I believe the Nova União camp with Aldo, Renan Barao avoids over 90% of the takedown attempts that are thrown his way. Urijah Faber, I can only imagine, is going to want to take this fight to the ground, given the fact that Barao's unorthodox striking, I think, is going to be very tough for Faber to deal with, even though he's got a little extra padding on the butt chin there. Barao's got really unorthodox strikes. He throws elbows from really weird angles, punches from weird angles, he throws flying shit. Barao's an unorthodox striker, and if Faber can't get this fight to the ground, as the statistics show that Barao stuffs over, I believe it's 93%. 93% of all takedown attempts against him. If Faber can't get this fight to the ground, it could be a long night for him. I'm predicting it is, and in something of an upset, I'm going to take Renan Barao. Unanimous judges' decision victory after 5 rounds to become the interim bantamweight champion, setting up Renan Barao versus Dominick Cruz at some point in the future to unify the Bantamweight Championship. Those are my predictions for UFC 149 in Calgary. Go over them with you one more time. At lightweight, I have Anton Koivunen winning a unanimous judges' decision over Mitch Clark. Featherweight, I have Antonio Carvalho winning a unanimous judges' decision over Daniel Pineda. On the FX prelim card, I have Mitch Gagnon submitting Bryan Caraway in the second round in the bantamweight division. Light heavyweight division, I have Ryan Jimmo grinding out a unanimous decision victory against Anthony Perosh. Again at bantamweight, I have Roland Delorme submitting Francisco Rivera inside the second round. At middleweight, I have Court McGee scoring a unanimous judges' decision victory over Nick Ring. Moving on to the main card, the fight that doesn't belong in the main card. Welterweight, I have Chris Clements TKOing Matt Riddle in the first round. And the welterweight division, I have Bryan Eversole TKOing or knocking out James Head in the third round. Heavyweight division, I have Shawn Jordan with a unanimous judges' decision victory over Cheick Kongo. Co-main event, middleweight division, I have Hector Lombard scoring a unanimous judges' decision victory over Tim Boetsch. And in the main event, Interim Bantamweight Championship, I have Renan Barao with a hard-fought 5-round unanimous judges' decision victory over Urijah Faber to become the Interim Bantamweight Champion. That's it for me. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Sorry about all the convulsions in this video. I feel like I might be coming down with something, but I wanted to get this video out for you guys. Enjoy the fights, UFC 149. Again, don't worry about what the fight card might have been. Enjoy what the fight card is. See you later.